Welcome to the My Money Questions Answered video for this week. This is something I do for my subscribers who send in questions. I use this opportunity to give you an answer. And this week, I wanted to chat about access bonds because I've been picking up a lot of issues about accessing your prepaid funds in your access bond. And I suspect this is a little bit of a sign of the times. Maybe for a lot of people, they're feeling the financial stress right now and they want to pull down on their access bonds, or maybe they want to tap into their access bonds to put in solar and energy solutions. So whatever the reason is, it seems like a lot of people are wanting to access their access bonds and they find that they can't always get all the money out. So I investigated. I do have to tell you that my head nearly exploded trying to understand the different banks' models. So this is not easy. If you don't understand, it's not that you're stupid. Trust me, it's because the banks make this very, very difficult. First up, make sure you have an access bond. And that's a little bit obvious, but if you don't have an access bond, any prepayments or payments that you make above the normal payments you need to make, you can't get out again. It'll reduce your term or it'll reduce your installment, but you won't be able to get it out again. So just make sure that you actually have an access bond. Then if you have an access bond, each bank has a different way of treating it. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky. You've got to know which bank you're with and to what extent it treats the access bond differently or those prepaid amounts differently. So for some banks, they calculate your installment on your outstanding balance. Other banks calculate your installment on your amortization balance. Okay, I'm going to explain that in English. So if, for example, your mortgage is R1 million, but you prepay, you put in 100,000 Rand, and you actually drop it to 900,000 Rand. If your bank does it on what we would call the outstanding balance, they'd say, okay, you no longer owe us R1 million, you owe us 900,000 Rand, and we will drop the installment accordingly. So you will pay off still over 20 years, but you will pay off 900,000, not $1 million. So that has the impact of actually reducing your monthly installment. But it also means that those prepaid funds are actually being run down to zero over the 20-year period, if that makes sense. So you won't get all of your funds back. Now, for example, Nedbank defaults to this, and so does Standard Bank's option 2. So you need to ask when you are dealing with the bank, saying, will you automatically, if I put in more money, will you automatically reduce my installment or will you keep it the same? Then the other banks like FNB and I think ABSA does it as well, they say, no, we will work with your amortization balance. So we will say that you want to pay off R1 million, we'll stick with that R1 million over 20 years. So if you put in 100,000 Rand, we will assume that you're going to take the 100,000 out again, and we will maintain your installment based on the original agreement of R1 million. And in that way, your funds remain fully available. So this is in theory how it works, right? So if you, for example, were with Nedbank, you would have to actually instruct them and say, listen, guys, I've put in extra money, but I want you to maintain my original installment because I want to be able to access 100% of those funds at any time. Okay, so some banks you're going to have to instruct, others default to that. First thing. Then, just to make life a little more complicated, there is a period of time every month where you may not be able to access all of your funds, even if your bank does allow it. And this, sorry guys, I don't understand why the banks do this, but they do it. So several days before your debit order goes through, they actually allocate a portion. So if, say, for example, you paid an extra money, they will keep some of that extra money to cover your installment until your installment goes off. So they're saying, well, they want to wait until your debit order has cleared before letting you take out your full prepaid amount. So what people found was that if they were using their bank or their access fund as kind of an emergency fund, sort of putting money in at the beginning of the month to take out and using it a little bit as cash flow, they were coming unstuck because for a couple of days, up to 10 days before the end of the month, they couldn't actually access those funds. So that came as a surprise. I didn't even know banks did this, I have to confess, but yes, they do it. What I don't understand is, well, if I didn't have prepaid funds, you wouldn't be able to keep that money aside to cover my installment. So I don't really understand. Not sure about that one, but that's what the banks do. So there may be that period of time that you can't access your prepaid funds. Then There's another whole complication, which is why I've been getting a lot of questions about Standard Bank. Standard Bank has two options when you come to an access bond. So they've got access bond link option 1 and access bond link option 2. So access bond link option 1 is what I spoke about earlier, where I say they use the amortization balance. So your installment will not reduce if you put in prepayments. And if you never drew down on that money again, your mortgage will be paid off sooner. Okay, that's what would happen. Bond link 2, option 2, is the other one I mentioned, which is on outstanding balance, where your installment will reduce, which means that over time you will still pay it off over the same amount of time. You won't pay it off any sooner, and it will slowly eat into your prepaid funds will slowly reduce. Okay, so remember I spoke about those two options up front. So Standard Bank's allowing their customers to choose between those two options. First of all, that seems to be creating a lot of confusion. Just understand option 1, your installment doesn't reduce. Option 2, your installment does reduce. But this is where the but comes. Standard Bank, and it appears that ABSA is the same. FNB tells me they don't do this, so this is what I've been told. You do need to please double check with your bank directly, but it does seem that their consultants are as confused. But what Standard Bank does, when interest rates change, it all goes pear-shaped, because when the interest rate changes, which of course it's been doing almost every second month for the last 18 months, they reset the loan. So if you had chosen option 1, where your installment would not reduce, when the interest rates are increased, for example, which they have done, they will recalculate the loan based on the outstanding balance. So if your original loan agreement was R1,000,000, you put in 100,000 as a prepayment, the interest rates change. They almost see it as a new loan, just to make it, technically that's not a new loan, but they will almost look at it, and they will rebalance your installments on the 900,000 Rand. And so your installments actually do decrease. You may not necessarily notice it because, of course, the interest rates have gone up, so your installment would be going up anyway. But actually, technically speaking, you're not paying the full installment that you would have had it stayed at the R1,000,000. Okay, I hope this is making sense. Whereas FNB says to me, no, we don't do that. We keep it at the amortization value. We keep it as if it's the R1,000,000. And so you will see the full increase on the installment of that, the impact of that interest rate. Standard Bank almost kind of, you don't see, you probably won't even see a real increase on your installment when interest rates go up, because actually what they're doing is they're tapping into your prepaid funds. This is where we're picking up a lot of complaints. So people come along, they now want to withdraw some of those prepaid funds, and they have reduced because of this. So you have to actively instruct Standard Bank every time there's an interest rate increase to increase your installment in line with what it should be if you hadn't put prepaid funds in. Standard Bank says they do send SMSs to their customers, and their customers have that option, but you have to take action. So guys, I hope this all makes sense. It is confusing. There is absolutely no doubt about that. I'm sorry about that. There's nothing I can do about it. But when I did spend a lot of time with the Standard Bank team understanding their mechanisms. And I do think, to the bank's credit, it is complicated. Access bonds are actually not really provided anywhere else in the world, because it is a difficult mechanism to work with. And each bank treats it differently. So it's important to understand exactly how your access bond works. I wanted to add in one last quick little thing. Another question I was getting a lot of was people saying, I don't have an access bond, but I have made prepayments. Do I need to switch to an access bond to access that money? And actually, no, don't go to the expense of switching and changing a whole bond. You simply need to ask for something called a re-advance. Ask for the bank for a re-advance. They will have to do a credit check on you. But if you have prepaid funds in there, the re-advance will release them without having to change your mortgage. So there you are. Hope you found that helpful.